Again, this is the California Access to Justice Commission, Racial Justice and Intersectionality Committee. And let's start with a round of introductions. Hi, everybody. My name is Panita Jansa, the co-chair of this committee. And unfortunately, Judge Erica Yu, my co-chair, could not make it today. And I'll pass it on to Janice.
Hi, everyone. Janice Hirohama. I'm a member of the commission, and I'm the appointee of the League of Women Voters of California.
Rosa?
Hello, everyone. My name is Rosa Fregoso, and I'm also a member of the commission appointed by the Speaker, Anthony Rendon.
Kathy?
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Ongiri, and I am a liaison to the Judicial Council.
Judge Uhas?
Sorry, I'm Mark. So you all don't have to watch me eat my lunch. My name is Mark Uhas. I'm the chair of the commission, and I'm just an officious interloper. Thanks for letting me come.
Okay. We are being recorded today, so that's probably for the better. Jasmine?
Hi, I'm Jasmine Kadora. I'm the Senior Program Coordinator for the Access Commission.
Zach?
Jack London. I'm Executive Director of the Access Commission and an old friend of Barbara Arnwine's.
My blessing.
Zach?
Zach Newman, he, him, Senior Attorney at LAC. I help with staffing some of the committees at the Access Commission.
Darius?
Darius Jones, he, him. I'm the Racial Justice Coordinator for LAC.
And we have a guest today. Jack, please do us the honor of making the introduction.
I've known and been friends with Barbara Arnwine for decades. She has a very accomplished background. She began as the protege of one of the greatest legal aid leaders in the country and became the executive director of the Boston Legal Aid, and from there joined the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights as its executive director, a position she held for 20-some years. During that period, she took me under her wing as one of the co-chairs. We did strategic planning together and had a lot of involvement in a lot of real strengthening of the Lawyers Committee. I was around Barbara when she came up with the idea and the name that has become Election Protection, the hugely successful and important program that leads thousands of lawyers every year to volunteer to give advice and be on tap and bring cases to keep our elections fair and open to everyone. For the last several years, she has been running a new organization, the Transformational Justice Coalition, headquartered in Washington, but nationwide scope. She grew up in Los Angeles, by the way, and is thinks of herself as still kind of a Californian. And she has a very good Washington, D.C. based radio show, still every Tuesday at noon in D.C.
Yes, and it's listened to in 45 cities, 33 nations.
So,
and that you have been wonderful to support and they help back us in that radio show.
Well, Barbara is a powerful voice. She was also one of the architects of the Lawyers Committee's Environmental Justice Project. So she is an ideal person in my mind to talk to us about the problems of environmental justice, the solutions within the legal services, civil legal system for those problems, and ways that access to those solutions is not yet adequate and equal, and maybe what we can help do about that. So Panita, if you want to just launch into that part of the agenda.
Yeah, so I'm sorry that Justice Streeter isn't on, because we're actually tasking him with spearheading a project for us around environmental justice. But good thing we're getting recorded. So Barbara, please share with us your expertise.
Well, you're very kind to have me, and I want to be, right up front in thanking Jack London, who is just a gift to the legal community. And it is my pleasure, to be here today and to talk to this committee, because my first love in the law has always been legal services. I was blessed to walk out of law school as a Reginald Heber Smith Community Fellow. And not only was a fellow for 2 years, but was one for 3 years, working with Legal Services of North Carolina. And I worked in the Durham office in North Carolina, and worked in legal services for the first, I would say 8 years of my practice. And so it was a real joy and honor to be a legal services attorney. It allowed us to do those the intersectional aspects of poverty, race, gender equality, and to really fight hard, for transformational justice, transformative justice for, people of color in North Carolina, as the population of people of color was growing, and as the resistance to justice was continuing to be such a high barrier. And when we think about the environmental justice context, that's when I did my first environmental justice work, by the way, was in North Carolina, because I worked with Ben Chavis, and I worked with many others around a landfill. And the term environmental justice came out of that fight and that battle while I was still in North Carolina over this very dangerous landfill that was threatening a major aquifer. And it was, really environmentally hazardous activities that were being done in Warren County, North Carolina. If you look it up, you'll see that that's where the term environmental justice is first used. And I had the pleasure of working alongside Ben Chavis and really learning from him and many ministers from the National Council of Churches and others about, environmental justice. I knew nothing. It was totally a learning experience, and it made me an EJ advocate. But all that learning meant nothing until 1991. And in 1991, that's when the first big environmental justice conference was held in the US. Right in Arlington, Virginia, and thousands upon thousands of people descended into the DC metro area to talk about building a real movement nationwide, and not all these scattered individual movements. And at that point, we decided as the Lawyers Committee to not just be a bench warmer, and to watch everything from the sidelines. We actually created the first environmental justice office project of any civil rights organization. And Jack will tell you that what became the first environmental justice executive order was written in large part by environmental justice advocates who came and stayed in our conference rooms forever. Including working on the floors of our building to draft what became the parameters of what would become the Clinton environmental justice executive order, which was the first one. So that was really, really big for us. And, it's been amazing for me, to watch how this field has evolved. from where we were. You know, I remember going into communities and the early cases and losing, some of these cases, winning others. But when we would talk about multiple impacts and talk about the fact that environmental injustice rarely was just one problem, it was usually a combination of others. And courts were saying, well, you got to trace it to one liability factor. And if there's multiple liability factors, you can't win. Well, what's been fascinating, if you look at a lot of the new policy, it incorporates multiple impacts. The notion of multiple impacts that we fought for decades has taken hold and become powerful. I was telling Jack that when I was reading the report on the California disasters, the wildfire disasters, it took me back to the case that we did in 2005 called McWaters versus FEMA. It was a case that was so, what would you call it? So innovative, so new in its approach to the law that they actually created a line in Vegas to bet against us, that we could never win that case. And because remember Sandoval, Alexander versus Sandoval regarding the application of Title VI for private enforcement had been already decided against us, against all the civil rights community. And it's a case that still hampers our ability to get a lot of justice. And they were looking at the fact that, the laws that created, FEMA did not, in their opinion, impose any duties. And we thought opposite. And thank God for, the SRZ, for that, that wonderful firm for coming out and taking that case. And we won. And it was 350,000 families that were impacted. And when I was reading the report, so much of what we discussed and dealt with in McWaters is paralleled in the experiences that so many people have had post-wildfire disasters, because a lot of the same legal issues are there. So I wanted to, talk in part about that whole question about legal representation, but I also wanted to talk about a broader, sense of how lawyers can work in this environment, in this day, with this law, with these needs that our communities have. California, of course, my home state, is a very unique state. It amazes me when I look at all the new environmental policy writing that's going on. There's a lot of it at the national and state levels, that California is used as a model. Some of the work that's being done in California, both in the organizing community and at the state level of enforcement through the California EPA, has been quite amazing. But some things, always come up. One of the things that we know is that the intersections of, race, as your report talks about, disenfranchisement, poverty, all play a very important role. But now I think we have to, even in reading the report, because it's pre-COVID, right? We know that one of the biggest factors also exacerbating inequality in the environmental justice context is COVID. And what has COVID taught us? It's taught us the criticality of healthcare in this fight. That it's not just healthcare alone, meaning the accessibility and availability of healthcare. It's the racial inequities that underlie our healthcare system. And of course, for rural communities, it's outrageous because that's where you have the fewest hospitals, the fewest urgent cares, the fewest available healthcare accessibility, period. And then you overlay that even in the urban areas with the racial inequities, and you see tremendous inaccessibility. And that's a nationwide problem. It's one that COVID has only really expose this nation to even more, to be aware that these healthcare inequities are at the bottom, but fundamental to any relief that you're talking about on the issue of environmental justice. So our broken healthcare system is a big part of what we need to, correct and work on. So, the lack of equity there is, a big question. I just wanted to, talk about, so what are some of the things that we need to be concerned about coming up in the racial, in this whole environmental justice area? One is, I was struck by the fact that as advanced as California is, you're still one of the few states that doesn't have written into your definition of environmental justice the concept of community involvement. And I saw that there's been legislation introduced to address that. But community engagement and community involvement is essential to environmental equity. You cannot have environmental justice without the directly affected communities having a whole lot of say and a whole lot of engagement. And yes, Jack.
Give me at least some more background. Where would that definition be written into the California's applicable authority?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading, I was looking at some webinars that have been done, train lawyers on environmental justice for California. And this wasn't pointed out, by the way. I just caught it the minute I read your California EPA's definition of environmental justice. The minute I read it, I said, that's not right. I immediately caught it. I said, where's the community engagement part of it? And sure enough, I then did more research and saw that the community, that the environmental justice organizations have been actually trying to pass legislation through your state assembly to actually amend the definition. And I was curious that when the Biden administration just redid their EO, they just redid their executive order on environmental justice, that they pointed that out as one of the key needs throughout the country for different EPAs to state level EPAs to recognize.
If it were in there, how would that work practically? How does it work?
Mandatory community consultation.
About
permitting, mapping, remediation, community based solutions, community education. There would be much more direct input about what should be happening, how it should be done, who should be at the table. It changes who's at the table significantly. It would create these advisory councils to have real input and to be replicated regionally and locally. It would just be a different thing. I mean, you got some powerful organizations in California who are heard, but even they know that the lack of the formality of it, the lack of the mandate of it is a problem. And I think that that's something that needs to change.
Well, our role as a commission,
yes,
is not to address substantive policy issues on things like this necessarily. But I imagine that there's a role for lawyers living within California's existing definitions to provide better access and representation on these issues.
And to, the whole essence of environmental justice is community engagement. Is that, the problem has been that people been doing things to the communities and to the people who live there. And what the people want is to have a say on what it should look like and what should be done and how it should be done and what to do about the existing effects of environmental degradation from the past. All of us drive up and down LA, we see these, wells, right? We see these, and I used to call them when I was a little girl, the horses. the iron horses, because that's what they look like to me as a little girl. And they're everywhere in LA. And some of those are problematic. I mean, some of those are, spewing different kinds of pollution. And the people living with that should have a say about what happens and how it happens and what's the best way of protecting their communities. And so, there's all these issues, water. There's so many, issues. I had sadly about 4 years ago, I had a little nephew, who died from asthma in Los Angeles. And, and so, the air, when you're talking about environmental, impacts, you're talking about air, you're talking about water, you're talking about, these issues, principally, but you're also talking about so many other things. For example, Jack, I would think that if I were looking at, if I were constructing, kind of like an environmental justice landscape of protection, or, building what you call the spine, legal services has been so much of the spine of legal protection in this area. I mean, one of the things you'd be looking at would be building, more around, two big areas, community, individual assistance and then community assistance. And in the community assistance, you would break it down into, several different categories. In the individual assistance, the report does a good job of talking about everything from evictions. We know there's a big eviction crisis getting ready to happen. Homelessness is a huge environmental under-examined, problem for environmental injustice. We know that that there's a lot of issues going on. In fact, I just met with Congresswoman Maxine Waters last week to talk about some changes that we need legislatively to address what's going on with the eviction crisis. There are some hidden issues that aren't talked about, employment, etc. But what I also wanted to point out is that in addition to the communities that we normally think of, there are other underrepresented communities here. And I was taken by the report pointing out the foreign workers issues. But remember, prisoners suffered a lot during the environmental wildfires, because so many of them were deployed, including women prisoners, to fight those fires. And their health casualties during that period was largely unprotected, largely unassisted. They were a community that I thought was very much ignored across the country in wildfire prevention and wildfire assistance. But I also, and I love a lot of the things that were talked about. But what I would say is that what you need when you talk about environmental justice, you need aggressive servicing, flexible, aggressive servicing, right? You got to have the ability, you can't be like we traditionally are, that we sit in our buildings and we wait for our clients to come in. That doesn't work well when in any disaster assistance environment. That you got to have, some real mobile access. You got to have some real help, because you're dealing with traumatized people who are under tremendous trauma and tremendous emotional crisis and mental crisis. So it takes, a whole kind of different servicing schematic to really, help. And that's why I'm so proud of what the legal services groups were able to do in California, because it was so critically done. But the other issues that you don't normally think of is because you're dealing
before you go there.
Yes.
Who is doing this work in California? You said legal services groups. Do you are there? How would we find out who's doing what?
Well, there is one thing I pulled up. I don't know if people can see it well. I pulled up some of the maps of the organizations that are working on these issues in California, and I even though I think this is what I call the top of the top, because I know there's a lot of other smaller organizations that I don't see on this list, but there are, a lot of incredible, organizations. That's what's called the California Environmental Justice Alliance. And it's a combination of several really great, organizations. But I did notice, there you go, thank you. And I saw in the chat, somebody put it there. And I also, I noted, from working in Los Angeles with so many of the groups, that there's a whole lot of them that aren't even on this list. But there's a lot of groups, and that kind of mapping of where the groups are would be, more of that mapping would be helpful. And I'm sure that, the CEJA could probably do that more easily, but things happen when we're putting together our alliances. We know that. But one of the things, Jack, that I worry about a lot, and we dealt with this in our casework, is what I call community reconstitution. Once you have a major disaster, displacement is the first consequence. And a whole lot of people, are displaced, and a whole lot of people suffer because they've lost lives. And there's a lot of, issues that underlie that, the insurance, all the things that the report talks about. But community reconstitution is the ultimate issue. And when you talk to the communities, what they want is somehow to stay together, to be reconstituted, to be reconnected, to not be dispersed. Because when you disperse low-income communities, you do particular damage to them. It's not just emotional friendships, relationships. We build as poor people, and having been raised poor, most of my, early life, until I got out of law school, having been poor all those years. What we do is that we rely on each other. So everything from banking to food to childcare to everything, we share and rely on each other. And when you destroy those networks because of a natural disaster, the first thing people want is to reconstitute community, and it's the last thing that government does, because government doesn't think that way. Government thinks so individually, so it doesn't think about what the impacts are of now having thousands of people disconnected from the resources that have sustained them, not just for years, but sustained these families generationally for decades. So those are some of the issues that we need to start thinking about more in our servicing. Yes.
So California has an organization of lawyers and legal organizations and pro bono programs that we're very proud of in the general area of disaster relief, because we have some. What I hear you discussing is one perhaps variant of the disaster relief effort for getting legal help to people in communities. So my question is, what are the kinds of triggering events to an environmental justice harm that ought to bring that kind of community and individual level disaster relief legal help to bear?
Well, I think before even triggering, I think that on the community side, that there ought to be, before things are triggered, I think there ought to be existing pro bono assistance already existing. Communities right now, they need not only help, addressing the degradation that they are surrounded by, but they also, and the, community education, but they also need access to lawyers who can help them assess a whole lot of things. Information. I mean, lack of transparency at the governmental level on environmental, land use permitting ordinances is horrible. And sometimes it's worse than that, is that even if the community gets access to them, they can't translate it. So there's a big need for lawyers at that level. I call that the kind of, informational accessibility level. But you also need, think about this. The Biden administration is about to pour down $200 million throughout the nation. So, it's not huge money, but it's money for these groups and grants to communities to do this work. Who's working with communities to make sure they're getting their grants? Who's going to work with the infrastructure money that's going to come out on top of this money, much more, to make sure that there's people are getting access to the green jobs and getting access to the community economic development money. When you have, all these problems with the lack of, urban sustainability and rural sustainability for impacted communities. I just think that there's a lot that lawyers could do on the proactive side to start, helping in the building resources and assistance, for communities. Because I think that, that Justice 40 initiative, as it's called, has a lot of where they are, requiring that 40% of every overall benefit from federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities. Lawyers should be really thinking about how to assist communities in accessing those resources. Now, on the individual side, I think that that one of the biggest, let me get my notes on the individual side. I think one of the biggest problems for so many people is the lack of connectivity to the legal representation, not knowing, as we know, these problems are ancient. You're dealing with them all the time about, people not knowing how to assess. But when you're in that displacement environment, you really need super help. One of the things that we don't think about, but it's curious, I've been watching the way that other communities organize around other issues, is we don't think about how to, for example, one of the things that you lose, you lose your job, you lose your home, you lose a whole lot of things, but you also lose your phone a lot of times, or you never had one. And I've been watching some of the other organizing going on around racial justice and policing, and I noticed that they give phones to people. They give phone cards, they give phones, they do all kinds of things to help the community to stay connected. And they set up, different kinds of what would you call it? Different kinds of groups and meetups and other ways of connecting with with people who are impacted because they get so displaced. So there's things that we need to, start thinking about a little bit differently than our traditional models. So one of the things that the Access Commission has done over its lifetime is write, we used to call them white papers. Yes. That Zach, but good papers, huh? Zach Newman, who's on the line, is somebody who has done many of these. Has been just central to our rural access papers. And one option from what you've been describing that the RJI committee might consider is whether there might be a benefit created if the Access Commission undertook some work on how to help support others in providing legal help and access to the justice system in effective ways for these problems. And so my question for you is, does that exist somewhere so that we wouldn't be adding to the, the world's wisdom by doing that work? We've got a lot of work to do already. Yes, it's, you know, it bothers me tremendously, Jack, that in the disaster relief world in general, you know, I see a lot of what I call tail chasing, meaning that, you know, people are just reinventing, recreating, learning anew. There seems to be, you know, we don't have a good system yet for importing lessons learned, how to organize better. I think, you know, a paper that looks at that, brings together the wisdom across the nation of the groups that have done this work and have been involved and have seen it and have been successful at actually helping communities to reconstitute, because there's a lot of service going on, but community constitution is so important. You know, when I was in New Orleans just recently, which was last week, I guess, when I was in New Orleans, I was so struck still by the fact that so many people have come home, but also by, you know, the longing for the, you know, brokenness of that community. The longing for, you know, people still wanting to return home. So, you know, so I do think there's ways of our coming together, putting our heads together, and creating some new, you know, models here. And especially right now in this environment when there's so much opportunity to you know, help with community sustainability, help with you know, community rebuilding and access to jobs and green practices. I just think there's a lot of good stuff that we can do. And I love California because you're some of the leaders, your environmental justice groups are some of the leaders in thinking about the sustainability issues.
Well, maybe a first step before writing a white paper is to find out what these environmental coordination groups are already doing.
Yes. Because they're rebuilding the California River, right? I mean, the Los Angeles River. They're, you know, they're doing, you know, the urban gardens and the urban produce. They're taking on the food deserts. You know, they're doing all of these really critical things. They're thinking about recreation and parks and how to, you know, have real environments. They're thinking about how do you educate people about asthma. And I mean, they're doing a lot of good stuff. I mean, there's some beautiful groups out there.
Well, the role for us, and then I'll be quiet for a bit, but the role for us is to help people connect with legal help.
And they need it. They need it. I mean, I've never met a group yet that's told me they have too many lawyers. I mean, it's always the opposite. It's always, why can't we get the assistance that we, you know, desperately need? Or just saying we got these problems and you're going to in your head and you're saying a lawyer could help with that. A lawyer could help with that. And there's so many roles here for lawyers to help. And I just think that that there's, you know, that there's a real need that can be done with the right organization. I'm so glad that your committee's been proactive and asking these questions now, Jack, about what do we do? How do we do it? Who do we connect with? Who can help bring, you know, learning to the table? Who can bring resources to the table? How do we do this the best? I think those are the questions that are the right questions. And I'm so, you know, appreciative that this committee is being this thoughtful and this proactive.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for everything that you just shared. I neglected to mention that I'm also based at a community-based organization as the directing attorney. So everything you said totally resonated with me, from the grant funding coming down from the feds to bringing those resources in to making sure focus groups are filled with community members and connecting to the right services. So everything you said totally resonated.
Oh, good.
Out loud. Many times in legal circles, I forget that hat. And I don't, you know, talk about being grassroots and talk about how important it is to bring legal services into the communities, not just kind of as an aside with legal services organizations that don't have that connection to those local communities. So thank you so much for saying that out loud.
Thank you.
Invite other members if they have any questions to pose Barbara right now. And in the meantime, I was thinking, you know, because you were talking about the national perspective,
Yes.
you know, our very own Judge Uhas, who may have finished his lunch by now, also co-chairs the ABA's Racial Justice Committee and might have some perspective on what other groups are doing on this very topic across the United States. Judge Uhas?
So I have to be honest with you. This is not an area that we have talked about. And so I think it certainly is one that is worthy of discussion. So the short answer, Panita, is, having just now finished my lunch, the one thing I hate about these Zoom calls is, especially over the noon hour, is that you end up actually, you know, watching other people eat, which is just wonderful. But having said that, it's a good topic, I think, for discussion, because I think it is an area where I do think that we sometimes do lose sight of going into the community and talking about community building, and a community building period. So I will bring it up at our next meeting.
Thanks so much. I have a question in the chat from Kathy. I'm interested in hearing more about the impact of unhoused communities on environmental issues.
Yeah.
Oh, that's, you know, unhoused communities, as we all know from doing, you know, legal services work, we know that unhoused communities suffer the most. You know, and it's just fascinating to me, you know, watching different cities models from, you know, total neglect to active engagement of the unhoused community. And remember, you know I have such a feeling for this because of the voting work I do. You know, I mean, and that's a community that nobody thinks about, you know, engaging accurately or effectively for voting rights. So as I'm, you know, dealing with these voting rights issues, I'm also seeing all the other issues. And I think that there's a real lack of attention and looking at the special environmental justice and legal needs that affect the homeless. Because where do they end up? They end up in the most undesirable places in the city. What's near those undesirable places in the cities or in the neighborhoods, in the communities? They are the environmentally hazardous ones. So there's a direct correlation here. And that's why, you know, we really have to think about how do we protect these communities uniquely when it's, you know, it's issues beyond sanitation, it's issues beyond, just, you know, housing itself. It's the issues of the exposures that they and their children are being put to. And also, you know, I mean, you know, I don't know if you've been following some of the postings from State Senator Vincent Hughes in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, showing just the horrific school conditions in a lot of these low-income communities, that they're hazardous. They're environmentally hazardous. Everything from the lead exposure to the just the lack of pollutants in the air, the lack of air quality, so many problems that we just don't think about because we think schools are schools. Hey, that's education issues. No, it's not. You got environmental issues right there in your school systems. So the unhoused, especially vulnerable.
Yeah, you know, I was just thinking in that, I mean, I just wanted to add in that context that I'm in the Bay Area. So in Oakland, there's quite a few parks in West Oakland that have, that they are looking to clean up. But many of those parks are now housing for the unhoused population. So it's just like the impact of what you're saying, all the multiple issues. So I just was really kind of interested in that. I appreciate everything you said today. I'm totally fangirling out here, just to let you know.
No, thank you. You don't know, I was so worried about doing this presentation because, I've been, everybody who knows me knows I live in voting rights. And if I'm not doing voting rights, I'm doing criminal justice. But at the same time, I got so many friends in the EJ community that they don't let me off the hook. So I was, worried about representing them well in this presentation. So thank you. And Oakland, I lived in Oakland for 2 years when I was growing up. So I did my 5th and 6th grade in Oakland. And my poor little school doesn't, Cole Street Elementary doesn't exist anymore. It's now a museum, I believe, or some kind of community center. But yes, lived all over West Oakland. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing. Are there any other questions at this time?
My friend Barbara is a dynamo. Thank you.
No, Jack is the dynamo. Jack is amazing. Oh my goodness, Jack is just, woo. From the time I first met him to today, he just continues to be the embodiment of the best of our profession.
Enough of that.
Yeah. It's just true, Jack. I'm just, you talk about fangirling.
I love it. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time out to share with us your expertise. We truly appreciate your words of wisdom, and we'll continue to move that needle forward.
Well, thanks for having me so much. And it's a joy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you. I miss you. Take care. Bye-bye. I'm gonna leave if I can figure out how to do it. Okay. Okay, I see it. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Okay, and I think we can conclude.